Soft wind blew across the empty Wyoming plains, but far away, in a town dusted with coal soot and forgotten prayers, a young woman named Miriam stood trembling with a letter in her hand. She didn't know how she got so low. Maybe it was the winter her husband never came home. Maybe it was the nights her baby cried from hunger while the neighbors turned their backs. Or maybe it was just the way life broke girls like her, quietly like twigs under snow. Miriam was only 23, but her eyes held years. When a coal mine collapsed that spring, it swallowed her whole world. Her husband, George, never made it out. His boots, his wedding ring, that's all they gave her back. And no money, no justice, just a cold stare from the foreman and a closed door. And now, with a baby just over a year old, she was running out of time. No work would take a woman with a child. The landlord wanted her gone. The baker stopped giving out scraps. She prayed hard, but the sky stayed quiet. Until she saw it. A crumpled newspaper at the post office. Tucked between ads for horse tack and dry beans was something different. Something strange. Rancher of good, standing Sikh's male bride. Christian values. Sound of mind. Willing to start a family. Immediate travel required. No debts. No history. The name printed below was Elias Moore. Miriam folded the paper 3 times and slipped it into her coat. She didn't know if it was hope or desperation that made her do it. Maybe both. That night, she wrapped her son in his only blanket and stared at the ceiling as he slept. His breath was soft. His fingers curled around her thumb like he knew nothing else in the world was safe but her. And she whispered, "You deserve better than this." She wrote the letter slowly, carefully, told just enough truth to not feel like a liar. Left out just enough to keep the door open. My name is Miriam. I can work hard. I can cook, clean, sew, and teach. I believe in faith and family. And I'm ready to build a life beside a good man. She did not mention the baby. Not because she was ashamed, but because she was afraid. She mailed it with her last few coins, then waited. 5 weeks later, an envelope arrived with a black wax seal and neat handwriting. Miriam, I accept. I'll arrange travel. You'll be met at the station in Willow Creek. Come prepared to begin anew. Elias Moore. That was it. No promises. No questions. No mention of love. But Miriam read it like it was a lifeline. She packed a bag, took only what she could carry. And at dawn, she kissed the cracked door frame of the home she would never see again. With her baby strapped against her chest and a borrowed coat over both their shoulders, she boarded the westbound train. She didn't know what kind of man Elias Moore was, but she was going to find out. And he was about to meet more than just a bride. He was about to meet a mother with a past he never saw coming. The train slowed as it came around the last bend before Willow Creek. Dust rose in soft clouds as the wheels hissed to a stop beside the small wooden platform. Miriam held her baby close, heart pounding like a runaway horse. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Her hands were cold. Her boots were too big, borrowed from a woman who didn't ask why she needed them. And her baby, Jonah, was starting to fuss under the layers of wool. She stepped down off the train slowly. The town was small. 3 streets and a church. A saloon with broken shutters. A general store with a wooden barrel of apples out front. And 2 older men playing checkers beneath a porch roof, staring at her like she was some kind of mystery. She looked around. She didn't see him. It was Elias Moore. Then, a man stepped forward from behind a wagon. He was taller than she expected. Broad shoulders, long coat, dark hat. Dust on his boots like he lived outside more than in. His eyes were sharp, gray like a sky before a storm. But it wasn't meanness in them. It was silence. The kind of silence that could either comfort you or break you. He looked at her. Then his eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms. The baby shifted and let out a small cry. And the whole world seemed to pause. Miriam braced herself. This was the moment. The truth she couldn't keep hidden. The lie, by omission, that could send her right back to the edge of the life she had just escaped. She swallowed hard. "Mr. Moore?" she asked, voice soft. The man nodded. "You Miriam?" She nodded back. Couldn't meet his eyes. Held Jonah a little tighter. There was a long pause. She waited for the words she feared. "I didn't ask for a child. Or worse, take the next train back." But they didn't come. Instead, Elias reached up took off his hat, and looked at her again. This time slower, like he was thinking something through. Then he said, "You must be tired." "Yes, sir," she said, confused. "Let's get you both home." Just like that. He turned and walked toward his wagon. No questions, no anger, no judgment. Miriam blinked, then followed, baby in her arms. The townsfolk watched as she climbed into the seat beside the man. One old woman whispered to another. A young boy pointed, but Elias said nothing. He just took the reins, clicked his tongue, and drove the wagon toward the horizon. And as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft and gold, Miriam wondered what kind of man this was. A man who could take in a stranger and her secret without even asking why. As the wagon rolled over the dry grass and the town shrank behind them, Miriam stared ahead. The road wound like a ribbon of dust into the quiet hills. And every minute that passed, she held Jonah tighter, wondering what lay ahead. The land opened up like a book no one had read in a long time, wide, weathered, waiting. Fence posts leaned like old men, and wind brushed the prairie with soft fingers. Cattle grazed far in the distance. A hawk circled overhead. Elias didn't say much, but he drove steady, like a man used to carrying things alone. It was nearly sunset when the house came into view. It sat alone on a rise, strong but tired-looking. 2 stories, white paint mostly chipped off, shutters hanging a little crooked. A wraparound porch with a rocking chair swaying slightly in the wind. 1 barn behind it. 1 corral. A chicken coop that had seen better days. But still it was something. A place. A beginning. Elias pulled the wagon up front and stopped. He looked at her, then at Jonah, and then said softly, "I'll carry your bag." Miriam climbed down. Her arms ached from holding the baby all day, but she didn't complain. She followed Elias up the creaking steps. The door groaned open. Inside, it smelled like cedar and bread that had long gone cold. The living room was plain. A fireplace with old ashes. A rocking chair. A rifle on a wall rack. 1 picture on a shelf, faded, black and white. A little girl with curls. Elias noticed her staring. "My daughter," he said, voice low. She passed. Miriam didn't ask how. She knew pain when she heard it. He showed her to a small room off the hallway. It had a bed, a wash basin, and a dresser that looked handmade. The window faced the sunrise. "You and the boy can stay here. For now." She turned to thank him, but he was already walking away. That night, she bathed Jonah with a cloth and set him down in the crook of her arm. The bed creaked beneath her, but it felt like heaven after all those train nights. She watched her baby breathe and whispered, almost afraid to believe, "We made it, baby." Down the hall, Elias sat alone in his chair, staring into the fire that wasn't lit. In his hand, he held a piece of that old newspaper, the ad he placed months ago. He had expected a woman. He never expected a mother. But somehow, something about the sound of tiny baby breath from down the hall made the house feel a little more alive. Just a little. The next morning, the sun rose bright over the hills, spilling golden light through the windows of Elias Moore's ranch house. Miriam hadn't slept much, but her baby had. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like fear. She made breakfast quietly. Eggs from the coop, a little toast, strong black coffee she found in the tin. She wasn't sure if Elias liked sugar, so she left it out. When he stepped into the kitchen, the baby already in her arms, Elias nodded once and sat down. His hat hung on the wall, and his hands were already calloused from morning chores. "You cook?" he asked after the first bite. Miriam nodded. "A little." He didn't say more, but he finished everything on the plate. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd had in a long time. After breakfast, Elias showed her around the ranch. There was the barn with 2 horses, a milk cow named Bonnie, and an old saddle that looked like it had stories to tell. The garden patch needed mending. The fence was leaning. He pointed to tools, told her where the water was, let her know she didn't have to do it all, but could help if she wanted. She listened, watched, took it all in. But later that afternoon, when Elias rode into town for supplies, things took a turn. Word had already spread. The mail-order bride had arrived, and she brought a baby. At the general store, Mrs. Latham gasped loud enough for the chickens to scatter when she saw him walk in. "You didn't say anything about a child," she whispered behind her gloved hand. A woman like that, hiding something so big? What kind of trick is she playing? Elias didn't answer. He simply picked up the flour, the soap, the fabric he'd meant to get for new curtains. But by the time he stepped outside, two men were already talking near the saloon. Bet she's lying. That baby ain't his. She's probably after his land. Elias paused, turned, and looked them both straight in the eye. That baby's under my roof, he said quietly. That makes it mine. The men didn't say another word. Back at the ranch, Miriam sat on the porch rocking Jonah to sleep. She saw Elias return, saw the quiet weight in his shoulders. She didn't ask what had happened. But later that evening, as they ate supper by lamplight, she spoke for the first time about what she feared most. You don't have to pretend, she said, barely above a whisper. If you want me gone, just say so. Elias put down his fork. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, If I wanted you gone, I wouldn't have built that crib last night. Miriam's eyes widened. She hadn't seen it yet, but he had stayed up late, cutting wood in the barn by lantern light, sanding every edge smooth, nailing it quiet so he wouldn't wake them. For her baby. For Jonah. For the life that had showed up without warning, but somehow already belonged. And just like that, something began to shift. Not fast, not loud, but real. That night, after dinner, after the lantern was turned down low, Miriam opened the door to her room and saw it. Sitting there in the corner, beside her bed, fresh wood, gently carved edges, the sweet scent of pine, was a handmade crib. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, staring at it. Her hands slowly reached out to touch the side. Smooth, solid, sturdy, built by someone who cared, even if he didn't know how to say it. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She laid Jonah inside. The little boy sighed in his sleep, his tiny fingers curling and uncurling around the edge of the blanket. Miriam knelt beside the crib. She remembered all the places they'd slept, the floor of the Coal Town boarding house, the rattling train seat, a church pew on a stormy night. She'd always had to hold him close, guard his every breath. But now there was a place just for him, a space that said, "You belong here." She wanted to say thank you. She wanted to find Elias and tell him what this meant. But when she peeked down the hallway, the living room was empty. Only the fire's last glow flickered in the hearth. He was already gone to bed, she figured, or maybe sitting outside under the stars, like he sometimes did. So she went back and sat beside the crib and cried softly into her hands. Not from sadness, but from something else she hadn't felt in so long. Safety. The next morning, the ranch hummed with life. Jonah laughed for the first time in weeks. Elias looked up from fixing the fence and actually smiled when he heard it. Miriam blushed, wiping flour from her cheek as she baked cornbread for the noon meal. It wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful, and word began to spread in town again. But this time, it was different. Mrs. Latham, still gossiping on the church steps, now said, "Well, I suppose that baby don't cry much, and she keeps a tidy home." And old Mr. Hobbs said, "That rancher's been alone too long. Maybe this is just what he needed." Even the pastor's wife brought a small basket of baby clothes from her attic, saying, "These were my son's. He's long grown. Thought you could use them." Something was changing. Not fast, not loud, but real. And one evening, as the sun sank low, Elias handed Miriam a wrapped package. Inside was soft blue fabric. A dress. A new one. Simple, but carefully chosen. She looked up surprised. "Why?" she asked softly. Elias shrugged. "You came here with nothing," he said. "Seemed right to give you something of your own." That night, she wore the dress at supper. Jonah giggled at the butter on his nose. The lantern glowed gold. Elias didn't say much, but he looked at her longer than usual. And for the first time, Miriam didn't feel like a guest. She didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like a woman standing at the edge of something new, maybe even something like home. The wind started before nightfall. A whisper at first, then a howl. Clouds rolled over the hills like dark waves, and the sky turned heavy with warning. Miriam stood on the porch, baby in her arms, watching the storm come in. Elias moved fast when he saw the clouds. He shut the barn doors tight, tied down the chicken coop, and led the horses into the stable with a quiet word and a steady hand. Miriam tried to help, handing him rope, bringing in clothes from the line, but he told her gently, "Stay inside. Keep him warm." So she did. The wind slammed against the windows. Thunder cracked like a whip across the sky. The oil lamp on the table flickered as shadows danced along the walls. Jonah started to cry, frightened by the noise. Miriam rocked him close, whispering lullabies and soft prayers, trying not to tremble herself. Outside, Elias fought the wind like a man who'd done this many times. But inside, something was different. He wasn't just protecting land now. He was protecting them. Hours passed. The storm roared like it would never end. Then, just before dawn, silence. The kind of silence that only comes after the sky has screamed. Elias came in soaked, boots muddy, hat dripping. Miriam rushed to hand him towel. He didn't speak, just nodded and sat by the fire she had kept going through the night. She poured him hot coffee. He sipped it slowly, eyes staring into the flames. "Thank you," she said. "Scared you turn us away." Elias stared at the fire a long time. Then he said, "I placed that ad because this house was too quiet. Now I hear a baby laughing." He didn't ask more, didn't press. He just stood up, laid another log on the fire, and said, "Get some sleep. I'll fix the fence in the morning." And in that moment, Miriam felt something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Trust, not just in him, but maybe in life again. The storm passed, but it left behind broken rails, scattered straw, and puddles deep enough to lose a boot in. The sun came up slow that morning, like it was still catching its breath. Miriam stepped outside with Jonah in her arms, the fresh air smelling like wet earth and second chances. Elias was already working, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. He didn't notice her at first. He was focused, steady, like fixing things gave him peace. Miriam walked over carefully, baby bundled in a soft quilt. "Need help?" she asked. Elias looked up. His mouth twitched like a smile wanted to come, but didn't quite make it. "Only if you're good with nails," he said. She knelt beside him, careful with Jonah in one arm, and picked up a hammer with the other. Together, they fixed the broken rails one by one. The baby cooed at the sound of the hammering, and Elias chuckled. "He's braver than I expected," Elias said. "He's had to be," Miriam replied. The fence stood straighter by noon. Not perfect, but stronger. And as they walked back toward the house, something caught Miriam's eye. Right beside the porch, half hidden in the grass, a single yellow flower. Soft and stubborn, still standing after the storm. She bent down and smiled. "Would you look at that?" she whispered. "Didn't think anything would bloom here." Elias stood beside her, quiet for a moment. Then he said, low and certain, "Some things bloom when they're ready. Not before." Later that afternoon, while Jonah napped, Miriam baked cornbread again. This time with honey she found tucked away in the pantry. She also did something small, but bold. She moved her rocking chair from the guest room to the front porch. Just one chair beside Elias's, a little closer than before. When he came in from mending the barn door, he noticed it. Didn't say anything. But that night, they sat there together, side by side, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Jonah slept inside. The land breathed quiet. And for once, neither of them felt like they had to fill the silence. Then Elias said something simple, something that would echo for years. "This house doesn't feel empty anymore." And Miriam, with her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, just whispered back, "That's because it isn't." The first cough came at sunrise, soft, almost nothing. But by nightfall, Jonah was burning up. Miriam paced the room barefoot, eyes wide with fear, the crib beside her now a battlefield between faith and worry. Jonah's cheeks were red. His breaths came fast. He whimpered in his sleep, little fists curled tight. Miriam held him close, rocking back and forth in the dark. The oil lamp flickered low. Her heart beat like a drum in her chest. She had no doctor, no medicine, no mother or sister to call. Just her, just Elias. He came in from the barn, saw the panic in her eyes, and didn't ask questions. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gently touched Jonah's forehead. His jaw tightened. "He's burning up." Miriam nodded, tears slipping down her face. "I've done everything I can. Wet cloth, Cool air, nothing's helping. Without another word, Elias grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called out. He looked back, voice steady but fierce. "To get help." The ride into town was cold and cruel. Rain fell again, thin and bitter. The road was slick, but Elias didn't stop. He rode like a man chasing daylight, like a man who finally had something too precious to lose. He burst into Doc Weller's door near midnight. "My baby's sick," he said without hesitation. "He needs help. Now." The old doctor blinked, confused. "Your baby?" Elias didn't explain. "He's mine." That was enough. Back at the ranch, Miriam sat by the crib, humming lullabies and wiping Jonah's forehead. She whispered stories, prayed, rocked him through every small cry. Then she heard hooves outside. Elias kicked, opened the door with the doctor behind him. In moments, Doc Weller was beside the crib. He listened to Jonah's chest, checked his temperature, gave him medicine from a leather pouch. "It's a fever, but he's strong," the doctor said. "He'll pull through." Miriam collapsed into the chair, sobbing quietly, relief crashing over her like a wave. Elias stood at the doorway, hat in his hands, silent. Then she looked up at him through tears and whispered, "You came back." Elias nodded. "Always will." That night, Elias didn't go back to his room. He sat beside Miriam until morning, watching Jonah's little chest rise and fall. At one point, Miriam leaned her head on his shoulder just for a moment. He didn't move, didn't speak, but slowly, he reached up and gently rested his hand over hers. A quiet promise in the dark, not spoken, but felt. The sun set slow over the ranch. Orange light stretched across the fields, catching on the wooden fence Elias had fixed and the front porch where 3 chairs now sat in a row. Miriam rocked gently, her hands folded in her lap. Jonah played in the dirt nearby with a wooden toy horse Elias had carved him. And Elias, he sat beside her, not saying much. He never said much, but he was there, every night, like clockwork, like home. It had been 2 months since the courthouse, 2 months since the paper was signed and the pastor said a quiet amen behind his study door. There hadn't been a big wedding, no white dress, no music, but every morning since, Miriam woke up in a bed that was finally hers in a house that didn't feel borrowed anymore. And every night, when the stars came out and the lanterns were turned low, Jonah would sleep in the crib Elias built, and peace would settle over the land like a warm quilt. Sometimes people in town still whispered, but less and less now, because they saw something different in the way Elias looked at her. And they heard the way Jonah called him for the first time one Sunday morning. And they watched Miriam's back grow straighter, her eyes brighter, her smile softer. Love didn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it came with a crib in the corner, and a man who showed up, even when he didn't know how to say why. So now there were 3 chairs on that porch. One for her, one for him, and one that would grow smaller and smaller for Jonah as the years went by. And as they sat in the glow of the fading sky, Miriam whispered, "We made it, didn't we?" Elias nodded. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional Western tale that'll stay with you long after the credits roll. Tell us in the comments, would you have accepted the bride and her baby? There's always more stories waiting on the frontier, and we'd love to share them with you.